The day after Yewande broke the pact, the village of Ogandil was never the same. Folake's Akara stand remained cold and untouched, the echoes of past laughter and gathering now replaced with a haunting silence. Strange things began to happen. Leaves withered in the early mornings, crops turned a sickly shade, and laughter grew less common. Even the sun, which once shone warm and bright on the village, now seemed dimmer. The villagers murmured, "She has let something dark out." Those whispers turned to avoidance, people began avoiding Yewande entirely, crossing to the other side of the street or looking away as she passed. To them, she was cursed. And Yewande, already weighed down by grief and guilt, felt herself spiraling deeper into despair. At night, her mother's voice haunted her dreams, a mixture of warmth and sorrow, reminding her of all that had been left unfinished. Her ancestors, too, appeared with eyes wide and grave, as if they were warning her. "You must protect the family," they seemed to say, though they never spoke. "But the cost is high." It was always the same, their mouths moving, but no sound coming. Every night, she would wake up drenched in cold sweat, feeling as though something or someone was in the room with her. Sisi, her mother's cherished cat, sat silently by her bed, watching her with those piercing, unblinking eyes. After days of haunted nights, Yewande decided to return to Old Man Adisa. She had no other choice. If she didn't understand what she had unleashed, it could consume not only her but her family's very legacy. As she walked through the forest path toward Adisa's home on the edge of the village, she could sense the darkness lurking around her. The forest seemed denser, the trees taller and closer together, casting long, foreboding shadows. Even Sisi seemed unsettled, her eyes darting around, ears alert. At last, Adisa's small, thatched hut came into view, half hidden by ancient baobab trees. A strange energy seemed to hum in the air, and the shadows near his home seemed to dance with an eerie life of their own. Adisa was waiting by the door, as though he had been expecting her all along. "You came back," he said, his deep voice echoing with a gravity that filled her with both relief and dread. "I told you the pact would awaken things best left undisturbed." "Please, Baba Adisa," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell me what I've done." The old man led her into his dark, smoky hut. The walls were covered with ancient symbols, and charms hung from the ceiling, swaying as if moved by an unseen force. He motioned for her to sit on a low wooden stool across from him, while Sisi curled up at her feet, her eyes still wide and watchful. "This curse, child, was made generations ago," Adisa said, flipping through the pages of her mother's journal, his fingers tracing the symbols carefully. "Your ancestors made a bargain with a spirit, a dark and ancient being. In exchange for protection and prosperity, they offered their loyalty, binding the spirit to your family's bloodline." Yewande's heart clenched as she listened, realizing that this curse was far older and darker than she had imagined. "What does the spirit want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Adisa's eyes glinted in the dim light. "It wants power. And power, my dear, comes only from sacrifice." The weight of Adisa's words hung heavy in the air. He told her that the spirit, once bound by the family's pact, was now released and craved vengeance. Her mother's rituals and Sisi's presence had held it at bay, binding it in ways only a guardian spirit could. But with the pact broken, the spirit had become untethered, capable of wreaking havoc not only on Yewande but on the entire village. "There is only one way to end this, to truly set your family free," Adisa said. "A reverse pact. What does that mean?" Yewande asked, gripping the edges of her stool. Adisa's gaze was steady but filled with sorrow. "It means you must give something as valuable as what your ancestors took from the spirit. And that kind of power," he paused, his eyes falling on Sisi, who was watching them with an unblinking stare, "can only come from a life, willingly given." Yewande's eyes widened, and she looked down at Sisi, her heart aching. But I can't do that to her. She's all I have left of my mother. Adisa's expression softened. The cat is not just an ordinary creature. Sisi is your family's guardian, a spirit in her own right, tied to your family's destiny. If Sisi goes willingly, the spirit will be bound forever, never to haunt another generation. But if not, it may take someone else. Perhaps even you. The words hit Yewande like a blow to the chest. She knew that sacrificing Sisi meant giving up the last connection to her mother, the last part of her family that felt whole. But if she didn't, she risked losing her own life or the lives of others she loved. With a heavy heart, she nodded. I'll do it. If it will save my family, I'll do it. Adisa placed a hand on her shoulder. Prepare yourself, child. This is not an easy path. Adisa handed her a bundle of herbs and instructed her on how to prepare for the ritual. At dawn, bring Sisi to your mother's Akara stand, burn these herbs, and chant the words your mother taught you. Sisi must go willingly. Only then will the pact be complete. That night, Yewande couldn't sleep. She stayed up, watching Sisi, who sat on her lap, purring softly. She stroked the cat's fur, her fingers trembling as she thought about what she was about to do. Sisi looked up at her, and in those unblinking eyes, Yewande thought she saw a flicker of understanding. In the early hours of the morning, Yewande made her way to her mother's Akara stand. The air was heavy with mist, and the village was silent, as though holding its breath. She knelt beside the stand, arranged the herbs, and began the chant Adisa had taught her, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the leaves. Sisi sat calmly beside her, watching her every move. As Yewande continued the chant, she felt a strange warmth, like a presence wrapping around her, urging her forward. But then, just as she was about to perform the final part of the ritual, she heard a voice so familiar it stopped her heart. Yewande. She froze, looking up. In the faint morning light, she saw the silhouette of her mother, standing just beyond the edge of the clearing, her face soft and full of love. Mama. Yewande whispered, her voice trembling. Her mother's figure nodded, her eyes sad but warm. My child, you are brave. Braver than I ever was. But listen to me, there is another way. Yewande's heart raced. What do you mean? Her mother's spirit stepped closer, her form shimmering like mist in the dawn light. The spirit does not want Sisi. It wants a life, yes, but not hers. The only way to truly break this curse is for you to give yourself willingly. That is the true sacrifice. The word struck Yewande like a lightning bolt. But I don't understand. If I give myself, won't that doom the family to the curse again? Her mother shook her head. No. The spirit has been bound to our family, but if one of us willingly gives ourselves, it will be satisfied. It will take its due and leave the family in peace. Yewande's hands began to shake. This was the ultimate price, her life for her family's freedom. She looked down at Sisi, who was watching her, as if sensing the decision she was about to make. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of generations on her shoulders. Then I will do it. With resolve, Yewande began the chant anew, this time offering herself instead of Sisi. She closed her eyes, feeling a deep, cold presence surround her, pressing in from all sides. The air grew heavy, and the ground beneath her began to tremble as she chanted the words of her mother's ritual. Suddenly, she felt Sisi's paw on her hand. She opened her eyes and saw the cat staring up at her, a look of fierce loyalty and protectiveness in those unblinking eyes. Sisi let out a low, guttural sound, the sound that was almost human, and then, to Yewande's astonishment, the cat began to glow. The light enveloped Sisi, growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. And then, with a final, defiant hiss, Sisi leaped into the darkness that surrounded Yewande, her form dissolving into the shadows. The spirit let out a terrible scream, a sound that shook the very earth beneath her. The darkness began to recede, pulling away from Yewande as though it had been burned. She watched, stunned, as the shadows retreated, fleeing into the earth, taking the spirit with them. When the light faded, Yewande found herself alone. The air was still, and the ground was silent. She looked around, searching for Sisi, but the cat was nowhere to be found. A terrible emptiness settled in her chest. Sisi had sacrificed herself, taking the spirit with her, binding it forever. Yewande knelt by the Akara stand, tears streaming down her face, mourning the loss of her faithful guardian. In the days that followed, the village slowly returned to normal. The crops began to thrive again, and businesses picked up as if the dark cloud that had hung over the village had been lifted. The villagers whispered about Yewande, the girl who had broken her family's curse, who had ended the darkness that had haunted them for generations. They came to her, offering gifts, expressing gratitude, but Yewande remained quiet, her heart heavy with the loss of Sisi. As she went about her days, she felt the cat's absence keenly. Every time she glanced at her feet, she expected to see Sisi there, watching her with those unblinking eyes. But the spot remained empty. One night, as she was closing up her mother's old stand, she felt a warm breeze, a soft brush against her ankle. She looked down, her heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Still, she felt a presence, as if Sisi were watching over her, even in death. Yewande smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. She knew that Sisi's spirit would always be with her, guarding her family even from the other side. The darkness had been vanquished, the curse broken. And as Yewande looked out over the village, she felt a peace settle over her. She had lost much, but she had gained something far more precious, the freedom of her family and the knowledge that love, even in the form of a guardian cat, was the most powerful force of all. And as the stars filled the night sky, Yewande whispered a final goodbye to Sisi, knowing that her faithful companion was now truly at rest.